so much for everybody getting up so early to be here. Prior to being a chiropractor, which pretty much set my career in terms of sports injury, I absolutely love every minute of practice after 30 years. I have the opportunity to be with high school athletes, collegiate athletes, the professional athletes that have come in. I'm going to tell you my favorite is working with the high school athletes. These are the kids that play for the love of the game. And they're really learning so much. They're little sponges. So when you want them to do something, they will do what you want. Collegiate athletes, the same. Things have happened over the years that have changed my practice. When I first started practicing, ACL injuries, we primarily only saw in collegiate athletes. I'm now seeing them in 10-year-old little girls. So why is this happening? What's going on? So I have the privilege of sharing with you about 24 hours worth of my programs. I do a 12-hour for CCSP and lower leg, foot, and ankle and running injuries, and I do another 12 hours in the female athlete. So I'm going to take that and put it into about 45 minutes for you. So hang on. And I talk New Jersey fast, but we're on East Coast. I have to see if I can get this to move. Is this going to work? Okay, that's easy. All right. And again, bear with me. Why do we do this? It's here somewhere. It's here. I wanted to embed this, but Nike will not let me embed it, so unless I become friends with them. Really good friends with them.
Yeah, you don't do that.
And we may skip it, but we'll play it at the end. Just played about a minute ago out there. Why we do what we do. Okay. I will play that for you later. Let's talk a little bit about the female athlete. How many people here have a female athlete in their family? How many of you have coached female athletes? How many of you have coached your daughters? I had that privilege this year. I have an 11-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. My 12-year-old daughter is not the daughter I've been raising for the last 10 years. Things have changed. But what I want, let's talk a little bit about, I don't know if I can, that's my audio. But you know, it just wouldn't do anything, it wouldn't even pull up the video, so it's okay, we'll play it at the end. I know, it's my favorite video, it makes me cry. All right, when do we start adding in the sex typing? When's the first toy we give our daughter? A doll. What's the first toy we give our son? A truck. What's the difference between a truck and a doll? A little nurturing goes along with a baby doll. A little destruction goes along with a truck. So is it that? Now, I tried really hard because I've been teaching this seminar for a long time, that we didn't do that. My son gravitated to that truck. He went right to that truck. My daughter went right to her stuffed animals, right to that. So is it genetic? Is it internal? Is it part of the DNA? Is it nature versus nurture? So I'm throwing some things out at you. I don't have all those answers, but let's look at that when we talk about it. Boys are typed to be a little more aggressive, more competitive. Girls typed to be a little more nurturing, a little more chatty if you coached a female team, and a little more conserved with injury. So in various studies that are out there, they've taken a girl and a boy on a bike, and they set up a path. It was a puddle, it was a mound of dirt, it was a pothole, and they wanted to see how the kids reacted without anything. They said, take this bike from here to here. The boys went over the hill, through the pothole, right through the puddle. The girls went around the pothole, around the puddles. And where does that come in? Is that genetic or is that nurture or nature? The hormones don't really kick in until about 12, trust me. And is it more of a result of our sociology? And what roles then tend to be assumed by the young girls? So Title IX came in the early 70s. President Nixon put into Title IX, no person shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied benefits of, or subjected to discrimination under educational programs or activities receiving financial aid. It was designed for education, but what has it been about? It's been about sports. It's been about building equality. So where are we in 2019 in this equality? Many, many more girls are participating in sports. Most colleges have an equal amount of men's sports and girls' sports. But if we go to the U.S. women's soccer team, the world champion soccer team, the men make $299,000, close to $300,000 per season. The women still make $99,000 per season. So where is that equality? And from what I understand, in just following the suit that they have, they've been denied the equal payment at this point. So they're carrying on that suit. So there is still differences up. Not part of Title IX in terms of financial aid and federal grants, but in terms of the equality and how the sports are looked at. In our last Olympics, the women outscored the men in U.S. in terms of gold medals. So the athletes are there. The athletes are growing. But there is a huge payment that they are making for that. They are sacrificing a lot. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the gender differences. What are the physical differences? Strength, chemical, and body composition. So I'm going to fly through some things today. We're going to talk a little about running injuries. We're going to talk about female athletes themselves, and then tie it together in our last couple injuries that we're going to talk about. So I want you to think about these things. But what is the body designed for? The female body is designed for one thing: bearing children, reproducing. So that all of these, the physical, the strength, the chemical, and the composition, all go back to preparing the body to allow for the childbirth. Centers of gravity being a little lower, larger, rounder pelvic inlet. The ilium is tipped more or more flared to allow for that baby to be there. All right, so let's talk about the female. Is going to show up shorter and smaller, and we'll have that lower center of balance. They have a wider, more shallow pelvis, again, to hold that fetus. The femur is, these are things that are really important. The femur is at greater angle to vertical. So when we look at the male versus the female in terms of how the femur comes from the pelvis, then we can look at the Q angle. Remember, the Q angle is from the ASIS into the center of the patella, and then from the tibial tuberosity up through the center of the patella, which indicates our Q angle. Q angles should be less than 15 degrees. So the male will be 8 to 12, the female will be 12 to 15 in a normal situation. They become symptomatic at 15 to 20 degrees, and they have the true instability kicks in at about 20 degrees of the Q angle. So looking at your children, and I don't know whether you actually even have to measure it. I can look at my children, I can look at the kids, and you can see that Q angle and how it kicks in. And you'll see that valgus of the knees. And we'll talk about this time and time again, that this is the number one situation that predisposes the athletes to ACL injuries and chondromalacia patella. So, but ACL injuries. So we'll kick in a little bit because I will get back on my soapbox and we'll talk about the type of shoes that young girls are wearing. We talked about the patella trap. All right, so the femur has shorter limbs relative to the body length and narrower shoulders with greater sloping to protect the child, to protect the breast tissue. The female has a greater carrying angle to the elbow. The purpose of that I'm still unaware of, but when we talk about that, what's the number one thing they say about girls and throwing? She throws like a girl. Now, we need to go back to, at what point do we give our son a ball? Yeah, as soon as they can throw a ball or hold it. At what point does our daughter start throwing a softball? Same for you because you're a softball player. However, most girls are not go into softball. They really don't have t-ball for girls, and most girls are playing co-ed t-ball. starting out if they're going to go into softball. And softball doesn't really even kick in until like middle school at this point. So they may not throw a ball until they're in middle school. So how much of that she throws like a girl is a result of poor training, poor muscular strength or development, and lack of mechanical training. The female has 8 to 10% greater body fat. Why is that? What's the purpose of body fat? To help keep you warm, and that's one thought. What else does body fat do? Allows for the production of various hormones, especially the estrogenic hormones. Without the estrogenic hormones, then there's no ability to produce a child. So the female has to have that 8 to 10% greater body fat to help produce the hormones necessary for childbearing. And they also have to have it for thermoregulation to protect the fetus and keep the regulation and the temperature at a constant place. All right, the amount of muscle mass in females is 20 to 30% less than the average male. So when we talk about strength, in terms of total body weight and mass, the amount is pretty much negligible. But in terms of where it shows up, that's pretty specific. Strength differences are greatest in the chest, arms, and shoulder regions. Women are about 40 to 60% weaker in the upper body than in the lower body. So I am all about equality in sports, but not at the risk of their structure. So let's look at this. Should a female wrestler be wrestling a male wrestler? No. It is happening because of Title IX. Women have to be allowed on the field or onto the mats. If there is not a female team, they have to be allowed with the males. So this is where we can put, it's all, we have to look at risk versus what we want them to do. In our area, we do have female wrestling teams, which female versus female is appropriate in terms of muscular strength, but not in terms of male versus female. What women have the great equal strength in the lower extremities. What do we use the lower extremities for? Bearing children, delivering the children. So it would be equal strength to the men. Torso is about 20% difference. And I'll get that question in just a second. So looking at what sports do we have them in, core strength, building up core strength, do we need to develop, if a female is in a more of a male-oriented sport, like even let's say golf, do we have to develop more core strength to keep her competitive in that? Muscular mesomorphic. Females, again, we have the higher percentage of body fat for the estrogen. Most of the amounts of fat tissue are in the breast and reproductive organs, more in the abdomen. One of the parents came into me last week, said, I'm a little concerned about the belly fat with my daughter participating in elite soccer. They need that. They need that. It's perfect. It's great. They'll be fine. And as they develop, as they go more, as their hormonal situation balances out as they get older, that's going to change. And they'll be able to work on it. And we'll talk a little bit about the female athlete triad. Percent body fat in female is 20 to 26%. Male is 15 to 20%. And we've got to stay in those ranges, as we'll talk about with the female athlete. Some of the physiological differences. Size of the heart. The male heart is a little bit larger in size, has better blood circulation, a slower pulse rate. You'll see the women will tend to have faster pulse rates. You're going to need to just know that and identify that. It's not necessarily a risk factor. Stroke volume is more in males. Blood pressure, systolic and diastolic pressure is a little bit higher in the male. There's more red blood cell count in hemoglobin, which again is a bigger challenge. Number one nutritional deficiency in female. Iron. Number one. They lose iron during the menstrual cycle, but inherently they carry less iron. So we need to be supplementing with that. And being aware of that. As kids that come in and say, I'm a little bit tired, your younger kids, high school athletes are doing it. So as I said, when I first started, we never saw an ACL injury in younger kids. And what is the increase in that? As I'll get onto my soapbox, and I talk about this with coaches all the time, what's the challenge now? I am the mother of a 12-year-old, pretty elite soccer player. Our team is number 4 in South Jersey and number 13th in the state of New Jersey. These girls are playing. And it's very hard for me. My daughter's like, really, Mom? Do you have to say something to the coach? And I will be, he'll defer to me now on different things. But these girls are practicing at least 2 times a week and playing at least 2 to 3 games a week, and they're 12. And so I insist that my daughter takes breaks. They take a winter break, they take a summer break, and this coach and I think what's happened is the team is really strong and has been doing well because he is taking those breaks and listening to us. But the majority of these girls, I watch them, and some of these more, as we see more of the elite teams coming out, they are playing 2 to 3 times a week. They are playing all summer. They are doing winter leagues. They are playing all spring. They just are playing all year round. When I played sports, and those of you, how many people I played field hockey in the fall, took winter off because I didn't like basketball because it hurt my fingers, because I probably knew I was going to be a chiropractor back then. Played lacrosse in the spring, and took the summers off and went to the beach. And I still played collegiate ball. Now, if they're not playing academy level teams, the teams are signing them as freshmen, colleges are signing them as freshmen and sophomores. They're committing at that age. And they're all about what scholarship am I going to get? And it breaks my heart when I hear it on the sidelines, people talking about this. The level of play has increased so much, and the time of play, that their bodies are breaking down. So we are the ones on a grassroots level that's going to get out there and help protect these kids. Because it's not just soccer, which I see. Lacrosse is doing it, and they dance, the amount of hours that these girls are dancing, gymnastics, and these kids have an opportunity to play at great levels at what cost? So, we had a little scare. My daughter she had an ACL injury this year. It was just a sprain. And my first question to her, and we'll talk about this, was, did you have your orthotics in? And she was like, well, no, I couldn't find them. I said, you are forbidden to play ever again without your orthotics in. And we'll talk about why that's happening. She lost the whole season for a sprain. I kept her out until we knew that's my daughter. So what are the injuries that we're going to talk about? We've got overuse injuries, majority of them, stress fractures, shin splints, ACL injuries, plantar fasciitis in young girls, in collegiate girls, compartment syndromes, Achilles tendonitis, metatarsal pain. These are all injuries that I saw in my 50-year-old women when I first started practicing. I didn't see them in kids. Fast forward 30 years, I am now seeing so many of these in much younger athletes. So we need to be aware of all these. I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want you to be aware of it, and we'll talk about a couple. But what's happening with the kids? All right, so let's talk. So I've gone through female and what the female structure is. Let's talk a little bit about we're going to talk some about the running injuries and some of the lower extremity injuries. So we've got the foot, and the foot has 2 functions in the gait cycle. It is a mobile adapter, so it propels us, and it adapts to the forces on the ground. Our foot's pretty important. Everybody says the knee's really important. After all these years of teaching lower leg, foot, and ankle, the foot is most important. It absorbs ground forces, adapts to the terrain, and then propels you forward. All right, so it needs to provide a stable platform. It needs to adjust to the impact that we're putting on it, and then it has to efficiently assist us in moving forward. So all of those muscles, when we do this, I'll teach you all of the muscles in the lower extremity. We'll muscle test. We've got to find out all of those muscles, especially the peroneus longus, and just note that down. I need you to learn the insertion points, the origin insertion. I need you to learn the purpose, the function of that muscle. Does anybody know where that muscle, so the peroneus longus is on the lateral portion of the foot. Where does it insert?
Big
on the big toe. Most people don't remember that. But if that muscle, number one muscle to be injured in an ankle sprain, how many people here have had an ankle sprain? How many people have put time and energy into really rehabbing an ankle sprain? Okay, so most kids will sprain their ankle and say, oh, you sprained your ankle. You'll be better. But that peroneus longus shuts down. And that is the number one, besides the gastroc, that will help in propulsion. But the number one thing that allows us to propel is when that peroneus longus propels us off in the gait. So that being injured is going to be a big problem in the rest of the mechanics of the lower extremity. All right, so we've got supination. Remember, heels land down. Supination opens up like a bowl. Pronation, the heel strike, you roll into pronation, and then you toe off. Pronation is not a bad thing. Hyperpronation, excessive pronation, is the problem. So we need to pronate, but what we're concerned about is how fast do we fall into pronation. So when you have heel strike, that's about 30%, then 30% into 40% into foot flat or full stance. How deep do you pronate? Is it excessive? And then are you able to toe off that first metatarsal? Because if you pronate, you're toeing off the third and fourth if that first is not functioning efficiently. So these are the things, again, as we go into these, I want you to remember when we go into the injuries. All right? Some of the muscles that we were talking about, I talked about the peroneus longus as it comes and inserts on, the main function is toe off, as is the gastroc. And then we've got our dorsiflexors that allow for bringing the foot up as we are going into mid-stance. All right. I'm just trying to review some stuff about, sorry. Sorry. There it is. All right, so we've got in our gait, excuse me, I apologize for running through this in about 5 minutes, but because we usually go on treadmills and look at stuff. But we have in our gait, we've got the stance phase when the foot is on the ground, and we've got our swing phase as we go through that. So as we come up, we'll come up. We have heel strike, foot flat, mid stance, and then toe off. And then once we're into that swing phase, we've got acceleration. So we're accelerating, that leg's coming up. Which muscles are contracting at that point? This is what you need to do is break it down as we've got our hip flexors, we've got our quads kicking in, we've got the eccentric contraction of the hamstrings as we come into pulling that foot, the knee leg through, and then decelerating as we come down. It's that mechanism, that firing of the muscles in specific patterns that allows that gait to function. So if we talk about any of these injuries, we've got to talk about the whole lower extremity, the whole gait program, the whole core muscular system as to how we're going to go into it. So when we're thinking about these injuries, you can't just say, they've got a sprained ankle. It's not just a sprained ankle. The peroneal muscles are off, the gastroc's off, the hip flexors may be involved in it. And as Dr. Bagnell said, what about the concussion program? Those young women that have concussions are more prone to lower extremity injuries. Right. Real quickly, just some function of gait. The width of the base when they're walking. If you guys are here, you have the beaches that you can look at. I always watch the kids as they walk into sand or something when they land. Heel to heel, from right heel to left heel, is about 2 to 4 inches. You don't want a wide stance, and you do not want the crossover. What you'll see is a lot of times with any upper musculature, the core strength, you'll see the crossover. The center of gravity should lie about 2 inches in front of S2. So when you watch them run, are they bouncing? They should oscillate no more than 2 inches in a vertical direction. Are they losing their efficiency when they're bouncing? They should really all run like Roadrunner. runner runs, you don't ever see him go up or down, just goes straight through. The knee is going to remain flexed during all components of the stance phase for shock absorption. The knee will learn to do that. Pelvis and the trunk will shift laterally 1 inch to the weight-bearing side during gait. If it's shifting more, what muscles do we start to think are involved? A shift of the pelvis? G medius, yes, very good. All right, and just some little, the average length of a step is approximately 15 inches. The average adult walks from 90 to 120 steps per minute. And during that swing phase, and we're going to look at a little picture of this, back to Frank Seba, who had some great pictures of this, the pelvis should rotate 40 degrees forward in the swing phase.
Okay, this makes sense, but this gait,
This is more of a walk.
this is just walking.
Right, this is just, in that
different.
cadence, yeah, just in
Thank
that
you.
cadence.
Okay.
Everybody's different in the running, yeah,
Cool.
a little bit different. But during this, but the swing phase, it's more in the running component, you don't want to see that much more rotation at all. All right, so let's look at a little bit about that. So if you're walking, you can see that. Do you have a question on that or difference?
No,
Okay.
difference of opinion, but I'm going to continue on, please.
Okay, and we can get deeper into it. Yeah.
Continue, please.
So things to look for is uphill, downhill, how the pelvis is rotating. Even when they're walking, you can pick up some of the gait patterns. I am really bad in watching people in the mall, walk through the mall, or on the boardwalk. My mother was walking with my friend. She said, "You're going to get arrested." Take a pic. Look at that heel strike. Look at that feeder roller. She's like, "You're going to get arrested," and I don't know. Yeah. All right. So looking at, in just terms of pelvic motion in the running, swinging their arms, do they swing their arms in front of the body? Are they using some of that motion in just straining and affecting the pelvis? Is there a lack of muscular strength at some point? Is the pelvis dropping more on one side than on the other? Is there a G medius? Is there a hip flexor component in there? And then versus running uphill, running downhill, what are the requirements? Because some people running in triathlons will have to be doing this. Are they running stagnant? Are they not moving the pelvis at all when they're going through this? So looking at all these in terms of little things that we're going through as we're evaluating the patient. And we can definitely talk afterwards about different things. Unfortunately, I have 45 minutes to give you. All right, so of the 40 million runners that are running right now, majority of people that are runners tend to run over 100 miles a year in what they're doing. Up to 56% are going to sustain an injury annually. That they will talk about. That they will actually report. How many people are sustaining injuries that they're not reported? Injury rates tend to be about 56% for males and about 73% for females. So let's talk a little bit about what could predispose a female to injury. What are a couple of things that we've kind of already talked about? Q angle. What could accentuate a Q angle? Lousy shoes. What type of shoes are most young females wearing right now? Flip-flops, high heels, only during seminars. But Crocs, and Crocs aren't terrible because they have the shock absorbing, and they actually do have a slight arch in there. But if they're buying their flip-flops at Old Navy, they're getting a deal at $1. Or they're buying them at CVS, and they're getting the flip-flops. And if you've watched the flip-flops, even if they've worn them for a week, you'll see that they wear out on the inside. And when they walk, they flip their feet. The feet don't just flip, they flip out. And they roll out into a pronated state. So flip-flops are accentuating pronation. All right, so that's number one. Number two, you may not see it as much down here. You may, but when it gets a little bit colder up in New Jersey, Uggs. The two worst shoes for anybody to wear, male or female, flip-flops and Uggs. And they are the two highest selling shoes in the country. So Uggs is amazing. They have Uggs. The kids up in our area wear the Uggs slippers to school. You know, there is no support in there. So again, if they are wearing Uggs, they need to put some type of arch support in them. I am a big proponent of arch supports. Whether they're custom orthotics or even a generic orthotic, something that's going to provide shock absorption and stabilize the arch. So the ankle is going to perform 1.5 times the work of the knee and 3 times the work of the hip. The ankle is the major stabilizer in the lower extremity and is responsible for 60% of the running power generated. The knee is responsible for 40% of the power generation, but it is the principal shock absorber. So if you lose the shock absorption of the ankle, if you lose it when you go in, if you slam into hyperpronation, now where is all the stress going? Right up to the knee, or in some cases the hip. Sets up that cycle. It may just be not a real full-fledged anorexia or a bulimia, but it's called disordered eating. They are just not eating the way they're supposed to. So 80% of women feel that the images of women on television should be what they are. The American women, average woman is about 5'4" and 140 pounds, healthy weight. The average model is 5'11" and 117 pounds. This is what the kids are seeing on TV when they start looking at the athletes. We are really blessed now that we have much healthier athletes as role models. Serena Williams, Carly Lloyd, Julie Ertz, just girls that have a good body structure. And so in the general population, about 1% have anorexia, 1 to 4 have bulimia. In the athletic population, up to 64% have eating disorders. And again, I'm talking disordered eating, not necessarily just anorexia and bulimia. Just not eating properly. How low is too low? Normal body fat, female should be between 20 and 26. When they get below 14%, then we're having a challenge with producing adequate estrogen hormones. The demands of physical performance can intensify a young woman's desire to achieve an unrealistic physique. All right, so disordered eating, loss of the menstrual cycle, we'll go to osteoporosis. Peak bone mass is the strongest your bones will get and is usually reached between the ages of 25 and 30. So these young girls at 12 to 25 in collegiate sports and everything are not getting the bone density, some of them feel it's really, I'm not getting my cycle, that's okay. It doesn't interfere with my participation in sports. That's not a good thing. Because then their bone density is never going to get to where it needs to be in peak bone mass. After the age of 30, 35, we start to lose about 0.5% of bone density in a natural situation. So if they're not supplementing with calcium, if they're not getting the density, they're not going to have the peak bone mass when they hit age 30, 35, then osteoporosis is going to be the sequela when they hit like 50.
Estrogen level plays
Estrogen level is very important in enhancing bone calcium absorption in the bone and in maintaining bone density. Yeah, estrogen is a big component. That's why a lot of women that go into menopause are not producing the estrogen. And within menopause, the estrogen levels drop, and that's when a lot of osteoporosis tends to kick in. So if they don't have the peak bone mass then, they're already at a deficit, and they're going to be osteoporotic a lot faster. All right, so we've got supination. Remember, heels land down. Supination opens up like a bowl. Pronation, the heels strike. You roll into pronation, and then you toe off. Cycle for about 6 months, or a length equal to 3 of her cycles. So what happens, and I'm seeing this in some of my younger girls now, they will get their menstrual cycle, but then they'll go back into a season, and during that season they lose their menstrual cycle because their body fat goes low again. So just trying to maintain adequate body fat with good quality fats. So the thing to keep in mind, there are shared features between a very fit female and a disordered eating female. So this is an important slide for, I'm going to ask you to look at that, and you want to figure out in purposeful training, good muscular development, you're starting to look like if there's electrolyte imbalance, is there cardiac arrhythmias, are they just doing aimless activity? And I've dealt with people that have had anorexia, they'll just go ride the bike for like an hour or 2 hours or something like that. So is their training purposeful? Are they following recommendations? All right, so real quickly I want to go, as we're finishing up, I think we only have about 5 more minutes to go into this, but let's look at the top 3 that I think that come into my office and why it happens. Stress fractures, patellofemoral pain syndrome, and ACL injuries. All right, stress fractures result when the weight of bone destruction from the activity is greater than the new bone growth. So that's your repetitive stress. So what are some of the things we're looking at, based on what I told you, to counteract a stress fracture? I see this in my high school girls. This is very prevalent in high school girls. What are some things that are happening? Nutritional challenges, poor essential fatty acids that they're eating, no calcium, they are not getting enough of the nutrients to support this. Secondly, poor gait because of
Improper gait.
improper gait,
Weaknesses,
right. Hyperpronation as a result of poor quality shoes, their arches breaking down if they're wearing, they're going to damage tissue if they continually wear poor quality shoes. And, yes?
Are we having a lot of problems more and more because our soil being so bad, we don't have things like boron and krypton?
In the food sources?
How much is that making a difference as far as how well bones hold up?
I think that's making a big difference. In the supplement, and are we supplementing properly for that?
Is that being studied by?
I'm sure it is. Dr. Howard is out there, and she does a lot with the nutrition component. She'll go deep into that, and that's a great question for her as far as how we supplement that. So I know she's coming in here next. Are you next? Okay. No?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I just have a shameless plug when you're all done.
Oh, okay. All right. But I was just pointing out in terms of, we were talking about nutrition status for stress fractures and things like that, and the doctor asked about soil sources and all that in terms of nutrition. And it's not something I'm going to jump into. We can, but that's another, 12 hours.
And you eat for all different kinds of vegetables and stuff.
Right. Exactly. Yes. And diet is very poor for these young girls.
You get that seaweed and stuff like that unfortunately some political guys say we shouldn't do because people in other countries eat it. We need to
You're right.
eat it.
You're right. So we've talked about, in that stress fracture, we need to look at all the components and the muscular balance and correcting gait imbalances to prevent against stress fractures. Secondly, patellofemoral pain, same concept. You've got your quadricep, patella, tibia. If there's hyperpronation, if that tibial torques, then and the muscles are unbalanced, you're going to have poor tracking of the patella, which causes the imbalance, if there's imbalance in the gait, and that quadricep pulls that patella back and forth, and it disrupts the undersurface of the patella. That is your chondromalacia patella, or patellofemoral tracking. Again, I go back to hyperpronation, I go back to tibial torsion, I go back to lower extremity weaknesses. And then the most important, this is it, develops with misalignment of the extensor mechanism. It's an overuse injury. It's due to that Q angle. And the extensive amount of participation in one specific sport. They need to cross-train. And then what predisposes the female to the ACL injuries? All the biomechanical changes that we talked about. Hyperpronation torques the tibia, which preloads the ACL in the production of and we'll show a picture, and allows that ACL to have loading. So then they start to run, and they take one pivot, and it feels like somebody has kicked them from behind. Yes?
Can you just say that again?
All right, I'm going to show it to you here. Hyperpronation torques the tibia, and the ACL sits between the femur and the tibia, and the ACL torques. When that tibia torques, and there's internal torsion, it preloads the ACL, and it's tension. So now they pivot or they torque and they put an excessive movement on it, and it's already loaded, and it pops. And that's, again, it comes from poor gait, poor mechanics, poor core stabilization, poor hip stabilization, pelvic torque. All of that comes into play. But it's not because somebody pushed them or kicked them. It's a non-contact injury. 80% of the time it's non-contact. Risk factors: obesity, excessive stress, osteoarthritis in our older individuals, overuse with the inflammatory response, age, instability, increased Q angle, excessive athletic activities, and an unrehabbed previous injury. Again, 90% of the time that sets up for the injury. Women tend to have a stronger, there's lack of stabilization of the quad. They don't work the quad out enough. So in males, when they've done studies, the males will engage the quad first to stabilize the extensor mechanism. The females engage the hamstrings first. So it tends again to torque. So making sure they have proper training, that they're working the quad to the hams. And we're finishing up. So again, I have a goal. This one wants to play for a long time. My goal is to keep her healthy as long as she wants to play. She goes from here, this is her in her concert. So she goes from that to that. She is cross-training and she's taking breaks. We need to really educate our coaches, educate our parents, and be on the same level with the kids. Hopefully you guys got a lot